The sensor alarm started small, a quiet ping in a room full of quiet pings. Navigator Thresh of Keth Monitoring Station Outpost Valar. 9 did not look up from his meal when it sounded the first time. Alarms went off constantly in deep space. Rogue signals bounced off dust clouds near the rim. Dead satellites sent ghost pulses into the dark. Half the time the sensor board lit up because a comet shed a rock, and the rock drifted through a scan zone. Then it pinged again. Thresh set down his food. He pulled the readings. The object was not a comet. It had a drive signature, a thermal bloom that spread across his display like a bruise spreading under skin. Something was under acceleration. Something very big. He zoomed out, then out again. He stopped zooming because the numbers stopped making sense. He opened the command channel. "Station Commander," he said. "Come to the sensor bay. I'm sleeping." "Commander, come now." She came. Commander Yaela was a tall Keth, gray-scaled, with the flat yellow eyes of someone who had spent 30 years managing a monitoring post that never monitored anything interesting. She had 12 years left before retirement. She had planned to spend those years without incident. She looked at Thresh's screen. She looked for a long time. "Run the calibration check," she said. "I ran it 3 times. Run it again." He ran it again. The numbers did not change. The object was 0.4 light-years out and closing, moving at a speed that should have been impossible for something that size. Its drive bloom was enormous, not the clean, efficient signature of Keth engineering, not the precise geometric burn of Valari cruisers, not anything she had seen from any species in known space. It was rough, almost violent, like something pushed far past its limits and kept going anyway. "Classification?" Yaela asked. Thresh pulled up the shape analysis. The computer worked on it. It took a minute longer than it should have, as if the computer was not sure what it was looking at and needed the extra time to convince itself. Then the designation came back. Thresh read it 3 times before he said it out loud. "It's a ship, Commander. Hull configuration matches an Earth-class vessel." He paused. "A warship. The registry match puts it as..." He stopped. "Say it." "The ISV Iron Grace." He looked up at her. "Commander, the ISV Iron Grace was declared lost 212 years ago. The Keth hegemony was old. 400 years old by their own counting longer, if you included the centuries before formal unification, when their 3 home worlds fought each other, and called it culture. They had expanded across 47 star systems. They had absorbed, outlasted, or crushed 17 other species. They were not cruel, by their own measure. They were simply efficient. They found weaker civilizations. They offered terms. The terms were always the same. Yield, contribute, be protected. Most species said yes. The ones that said no became examples. Humanity had said no. That was 215 years ago. The humans were young then, barely a century into real space travel. They had found 3 habitable worlds outside their home system and were proud of them the way children are proud of things they do not fully understand yet. Their ships were crude, but fast. Their weapons were creative in ways that made Keth engineers uncomfortable. And they had a quality the Keth had no good word for: a stubbornness that went beyond rational behavior, a refusal to stop even when all the numbers said stopping was the only logical choice. The Keth had sent a fleet to the human home system. Standard practice. Show of force, offer the terms. The humans shot first. Not a warning shot. Not a warning at all. The lead Keth cruiser was turning to present its broadside for the formal terms broadcast when 3 human warships hit it simultaneously from 3 different angles. The Keth fleet commander had been in the middle of his morning briefing. The battle lasted 11 hours. The Keth won. Of course they won 43 ships to humanity's 9, but 6 of those 43 ships were destroyed. Not damaged, not disabled. Destroyed. Broken open. And when the human fleet finally broke and scattered, 3 of the surviving ships turned back and made suicide runs at the Keth flagship. 3 of them. Only 1 got close enough to matter. 1 ship, running with her hull on fire and every alarm she had screaming at once, pushed through the Keth Point defense grid and rammed the flagship's engine cluster. The flagship did not survive. Neither did the Iron Grace. The explosion tore something in local space, a rip, a fold, a wound in the dark, and when the light died, there was nothing where the Iron Grace had been. No wreckage, no debris, no bodies, just empty space and the fading echo of something enormous that had stopped existing. Gone. The Keth returned to Earth 3 months later with twice as many ships and simpler terms. Humanity, without its fleet and without its finest ship, accepted. There was no choice. The hegemony was not punitive about it. They rarely were. After the example had been set, Earth was classified as a protected world. It could trade, govern its own local matters, maintain small internal security forces. It paid tribute. It provided labor for the outer stations. It was useful. It was quiet. It was small. The Iron Grace became a legend. Among humans, she was the ship that refused to quit the crew that had faced 43 ships and made those 43 ships bleed. Among the Keth, she was a training story, the kind told to new fleet commanders to explain one simple rule. When you fight humans, you make sure they are completely finished. Every piece, every crew member, every shred of hull. Because if you left something, it came back. Yaela sent the signal to High Command within 20 minutes of confirming the readings. She did not sleep again that night. The response came 6 hours later, faster than any response she had received from High Command in 12 years at this post. The seal on the transmission was the highest she had ever seen. Grand Admiral level. The orders were short and clear. Do not engage. Monitor only. Await the fleet. So she monitored. The Iron Grace came on at steady speed. It did not slow. It did not change course. It was heading directly into the interior of Keth space, on a bearing that, if extended to its logical end, pointed straight at the Sol system. At Earth, as it got closer, Thresh's instruments started returning data that made no sense. The ship was the right shape, roughly. The core hull matched the registry, the spine, the main drive section, the general outline, yes, that was the Iron Grace. But what was attached to it was something else entirely. Something had been built around the original hull, not repairs, not patchwork, real construction. Massive, deliberate construction. The Iron Grace's original hull was a skeleton now, and something enormous had been grown over it and through it, the way a reef builds up around a single rock left in the sea for long enough. Total mass estimate, Yaela said. Thresh checked 3 times. Best estimate, 3 times the original displacement. She sat down. The original Iron Grace had been a heavy battlecruiser, humanity's largest class of warship at the time of first contact. 3 times that mass put the returning ship in a category that outweighed anything in the Keth fleet except the command dreadnoughts, and there were only 4 of those in existence. Hull modifications? She asked. The results came back in fragments. Weapons, platforms, dozens of them, bolted to every flat surface the outer hull had. Extra shielding layers of it. The outermost made of a material his sensors could not fully classify. Docking bays. Large ones. Not fighter bays. Large enough to hold ships of their own. And along the full length of the spine, running from bow to stern, something that generated a power signature his instruments were not built to measure. He had to patch 3 separate sensor arrays together and run them as one just to get a number. When the number came back, he sat and looked at it for a long moment. Commander, he said, whatever they put in that spine, the power output is equivalent to 3 Keth dreadnoughts firing at the same time. Yaela stared at the screen. The Iron Grace kept coming. It passed Velar, 9 at a distance of 0.1 light-years, close enough that the visual scan resolved real detail. Thresh captured every frame and sent it to High Command, without filtering anything. The ship looked like something built by people who had been very far away from help for a very long time and had made do with whatever they found. The outer armor was dark, almost black, made of panels that were not all the same material pulled from different sources, cut to shape, welded into place by hands that cared about function and nothing else. The original hull underneath it was still there if you looked hard, like bones under scarred skin. The scars on those original panels were old and strange. Not battle damage. Battle damage had direction. These scars ran in spirals and loops, as if the ship had spent time somewhere that space itself moved differently. There were words painted on the hull near the bow, white letters, large enough to read at this distance, human script, English characters. Thresh had studied enough human records to transliterate them. 3 words. We came back. He included that image in the transmission. High Command's second message arrived 4 hours later. It was short. The Third Fleet was being mobilized. 200 warships, They would intercept the Iron Grace before it reached the inner systems. The Iron Grace would be stopped, boarded if possible, destroyed if not. No records of this incident were to reach non-Keth species. The protected worlds, especially Earth, were not to be informed. The reason for that last instruction was not stated. Yaela thought she understood it anyway. If the humans heard that the Iron Grace had come back, if they heard it before the Third Fleet destroyed it, the news would spread. It always spread. There was no stopping news that people wanted to believe. And the humans had wanted to believe in that ship for 200 years. Hope was contagious, in her experience. The most dangerous thing in the galaxy. When it spread to the right people. On the bridge of the ISV Iron Grace, Commander Lena Vasquez stood at the main viewport and watched the stars ahead. She was 34 years old. She had been born on this ship. Her mother had been born on this ship. Her grandmother, Reina Vasquez, had been one of the 41 survivors of the original crew, who came through the fold in space and found themselves in a place that was not on any map, a dead pocket in the dark, where physics were mostly right, but not entirely, where time moved at a different pace than it did in real space, where the wreckage of things that had died long before humans existed drifted in permanent cold silence. Lena had grown up on the stories the way other children grew up on fairy tales. The 41 who survived the ram, the years of confusion. The decision, made by a vote of every living crew member, to stay alive no matter what it cost. The slow, grinding work of keeping the ship running, then improving it, then understanding what the dead space contained, the materials, the strange metals, the ancient wreckage with technology no living species had seen, the work of reverse engineering things built by hands that had not existed in 200,000 years, using tools they barely understood, in a place where some of the rules were slightly different. 212 years had passed in real space while the Iron Grace drifted in the fold. 22 years had passed on the ship. Time in the dead pocket moved at a different rate. It was not enough time. 22 years was never enough time for what they needed to do. But they had used every hour of it. They had grieved. They had adapted. They had built. And then they had come home. "We're being tracked," said Hale, her sensor officer, a young man who wore his grandfather's name on a patch stitched to his shoulder. Station, at bearing, 2 to 7. Long-range monitoring post. Keth design. "I know," Vasquez said. "They've signaled high command by now." "I know. They'll send a fleet." "Yes." She looked at the stars ahead. Somewhere past the Keth ships that were scrambling to stop her, past the stations and the checkpoints and the perfectly reasonable military response that was already being organized, somewhere in that direction, was a small blue planet that had not heard from this ship in 212. This as well. Years. Let them. She opened the ship-wide channel. "All stations. This is Commander Vasquez. We are in Keth-monitored space. We are on final approach to Sol. Estimated transit time to Earth is 17 days. She paused. "They know we're here. They are going to try to stop us." Another pause. "They will not succeed. Rest while you can. Talk to the people you love." 17 days. She closed the channel. The Iron Grace moved through the dark. She did not slow. She did not change course. She had not changed course in 200 years. She was not going to start now. The Iron Grace was not one thing anymore. She had started as a warship, one very good warship, built in the orbital yards above Earth in a time when humanity was young and loud, and convinced it was ready for whatever the galaxy had to offer. 400 meters long. Crew of 800. Armed to a level that had made Keth intelligence analysts slightly uncomfortable, which had been intentional. The humans who built her had done their homework, and they knew what was out there. That ship still existed. You could still find her inside the thing the Iron Grace had become, the way you can find the original tree inside a forest that has grown up around it over a century. The spine was hers. The main drive was hers, rebuilt and expanded but recognizably descended from the original. The bridge was hers, layered over with new panels and new systems but positioned exactly where the original crew had placed it, because that position had worked and the people who came after them saw no reason to move it. But everything surrounding that original core was something else entirely. 212 years, 22 years, by ship's time of people who had nothing but time, nothing but need, and nothing but the contents of a pocket of dead space that turned out to be more useful than anyone had any right to expect. The fold had been many things. none of them comfortable. The 41 survivors of the original crew had spent the first 3 months of ship time trying to understand where they were. Chief Engineer Mara Ose, Lena's great-grandmother, whose picture hung in the main corridor, had been the first to figure it out. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. They were in a collapsed region of space, a pocket, something that had folded shut around itself long before humanity had language, back when the galaxy was younger and rougher and doing things to itself that it did not fully understand. The physics inside the pocket were not exactly wrong. Gravity worked, air stayed air, fire burned, but the rate of time was compressed against the outside. 1 year inside moved like roughly 9 outside, and the pocket was not empty. Whatever had been trapped in it when it folded shut was still there. Wreckage. So much wreckage. Centuries of it, drifting in permanent slow collision. Pieces of things built by hands that no living species would recognize. Ships, or things shaped like ships. Stations, or things shaped like stations. Objects that had no obvious purpose, and resisted every attempt to scan them cleanly. Material that existed in quantities and varieties that the Iron Grace's crew had never seen. Metals that did not appear on any periodic table they carried. Alloys that their instruments could identify as alloys but could not fully break down. Panels of something that looked like ceramic and behaved like metal and weighed almost nothing. Ose had called it a scrapyard. Her crew had called it a gift. They learned slowly. There was no choice, but slowly the first years were about survival, keeping the Iron Grace running on what they had, rationing, maintaining, figuring out what the fold's compressed time meant for growing food and recycling water, and all the other things that kept 800 people alive in a closed metal shell. People died. Not many, not fast, but steadily. Injuries, illness. One death from despair that no one talked about directly, but everyone understood. The population dropped before it grew back. But it grew back. Children were born on the Iron Grace. They grew up knowing no other home. They grew up without the planet-weight psychology of people who had somewhere else to be. No homesickness for a world they had never seen. No constant longing for open sky. They were ship people. The corridors were their streets. The hull was their horizon. They understood the Iron Grace the way you understand a body you were born into. Completely. Intuitively. Without having to think about it. And they were endlessly, creatively curious about the scrapyard surrounding them. The second generation cracked the alloys. Took them 15 years. With tools they built from scratch using materials they pulled from the nearest debris fields. The metal they found in the greatest quantity was something they started calling null iron, not iron at all. But the name stuck because of how it behaved. Dense, without being heavy. Extremely hard to damage. Resistant to heat in ways that should not have been physically possible. And available in enormous quantities. Because whatever civilization had died inside the fold had used it for everything. They pulled null iron from the wreckage, and they started building. The weapons platforms went up first. Not because violence was the priority, because people who had rammed a Keth dreadnought to survive the first time understood that the galaxy did not reward being unarmed. Chief Weapons Officer Park's grandchildren designed them. 12-barrel rail systems that could cycle faster than anything the original Iron Grace had carried, using null iron-tipped rounds that hit harder than anything the Keth had in their standard threat database. Energy weapons came later, reverse-engineered from something they found in the deeper debris fields, a device the size of a cargo crate that produced a beam they could not fully explain, but could absolutely aim. The shielding came from the same debris, layers of null iron plate over the original hull, then a secondary layer of another material they found later, something that absorbed energy at the surface and dispersed it laterally before it could penetrate. They had tested it extensively. They had shot at it, burned it, tried to cut through it with every tool they had, run it past every energy weapon test they could design. The secondary layer had walked away from all of it. They had wrapped the entire ship in it. The docking bays took the longest. Building ships inside a ship was slow, patient work. The smaller craft, the crew called them arrows, were not fighters in the traditional sense. They were more like very fast, very angry projectiles with a pilot seat and 4 rail cannons, and the ability to dock back on the Grace in under 60 seconds. There were 42 of them by the time the Iron Grace was ready to leave. Every pilot had grown up flying sims in the corridors, had logged more hours in the actual craft than any pilot in any fleet in known space. They had nothing else to do, so they had practiced. Lena had inherited command of the Iron Grace at 29, when her mother died of a heart condition that better medical equipment might have caught earlier, a fact she did not allow herself to be angry about more than once a day, because anger that became constant became noise, and she needed the signal clean. She spent 2 years confirming the preparation. She walked every section of the ship. She knew every weapon system, every shield layer, every arrow, and every pilot. She knew the numbers, the raw, honest, worst-case numbers of what the Iron Grace could take and what she could give. She had run every fleet engagement scenario she could design, using everything in the Keth tactical database the original ship had carried, updated as best she could with data pulled from Keth signal traffic that leaked into the fold at long intervals. She knew what the Keth would send. Not exactly, but within a reasonable range. She knew how they thought, how they organized a fleet action, how they responded to unexpected threats. She knew their blind spots. 200 Keth warships, she estimated. That was the response size for something they did not understand. Enough to be overwhelming. A number meant to make discussion unnecessary. The Iron Grace could handle it. She was not certain of many things. Certainty was not something you had access to in real command. Her mother had told her that. Her grandmother's journals had confirmed it. But she was certain of this. She had checked the numbers so many times that they had stopped feeling like numbers and started feeling like something solid she could put weight on. The Iron Grace would handle it. And then they were going home. On day 3 of transit, Hale picked up the signal. It was faint. It was compressed into a very specific frequency that was not standard communication. It was a survival frequency, one of the old Earth Navy codes, the kind used when a ship or station was too damaged or too monitored to use normal channels. A whisper sent sideways, hoping someone listening would know what to listen for. Lena's crew knew what to listen for. They decoded it in 4 minutes. It was coming from a station called Hera Point, a human-built way station on the edge of the Keth-controlled transit corridor, one of 3 stations Earth had been permitted to maintain for commercial traffic. The signal was 7 hours old. It said, in the compressed shorthand of the code, Raid, Keth enforcement, labor seizure, 47 taken, requesting any assistance. God please someone. Lena read it twice. Then she set it down on her console and looked at it. 47 people, taken, for labor. That phrase, labor seizure, was a clean bureaucratic term for something that was not clean at all. The Protected World Agreements allowed the Keth to requisition human labor for their outer station work. They used that provision constantly. Entire communities. Sometimes, people pulled from their homes with 2 hours' notice and sent to work in places they had never heard of, sometimes for years. 200 years of this. She had known. Intellectually. She had read the records. She had studied the history of what Earth had been since the First Contact War, but reading it and receiving it as a live signal, a real voice, real people, right now, were different things. Bearing to Hera Point, she said. 14 degrees off our current heading, Hale said. Adds maybe 6 hours to our transit time. She picked up the signal transcript again. God please someone. Adjust bearing, she said. 14 degrees. Commander, the fleet. We'll still be where the fleet is going to be. She set the transcript down. 6 hours doesn't change our intercept time in any meaningful way. Adjust bearing. Hale adjusted bearing. The Iron Grace turned slowly, because something that large did not turn fast, but with the steady, certain movement of something that knew where it was going and was not going to be talked out of it. On the hull, the 3 white words caught the distant starlight. We came back. They arrived at Hera Point in 6 hours and 20 minutes. The station was small, a ring and a spoke, human-built in the old practical style, built for function and maintenance and not for much else. 2 Keth enforcement vessels were still docked. Lena saw them on the scan before she saw anything else. She opened a channel. Keth vessels at Hera Point Station, she said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steady for a long time. This is Commander Lena Vasquez of the ISV Iron Grace. You are in contact with an Earth Navy warship. You have seized 47 human civilians from this station. Release them to the station immediately. You have 10 minutes. Long. There was a long silence. Then the Keth channel came back. Identify yourself fully. Iron Grace Registry does not. 10 minutes, Lena said. Starting now. She cut the channel. 47 people. She had crossed 200 years of dark to get here. She could wait 10 minutes. The Keth enforcement ships released the 47 in 9 minutes and 40 seconds. They did not make any other transmissions. They undocked from Hera Point with what Lena recognized as careful, deliberate slowness, the movement of people who did not want to make any gesture that could be interpreted as threatening, not because they were not armed, but because they had looked at what was sitting in the space 2,000 kilometers off the station and decided that being diplomatic was the better option. Both enforcement vessels jumped to FTL within 2 minutes of undocking. Gone. Just gone. Fast and clean. Without a word. Hale watched them go. They're going to report everything. Good, Lena said. On the station, the 47 were being sorted out by the station crew. Through the station's communication system, which the Iron Grace had quietly patched into the moment they arrived, Lena could hear voices. Confused voices. People who had been told to get back to their quarters and were asking questions that the station crew could not fully answer, because the station crew themselves were still processing what they were looking at out the window. One voice came through clearly above the others. An older woman, by the sound of her. Station administrator, probably. What ship is that? The woman was asking. What is that out there? A long pause. That's the Iron Grace, a younger crew member said. His voice was not steady. Another pause. That's impossible, the administrator said. Ma'am, the younger voice said. I know. Lena closed the station channel. She let herself have one moment, just one, where she stood at her viewport and looked at the station and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. Not pride, not relief. Something older and heavier than both. The feeling of a thing that was supposed to be impossible, turning out to be possible after all. Then she turned away from the viewport. Resume heading, she said. Earth, best speed. The Keth Third Fleet intercepted them 4 days later. They came out of FTL in a spread formation, 200 warships dropping from faster-than-light transit, one after another. The signature flare of each emergence, lighting the dark like a slow strobe. They were good. The formation was clean and professional. They had positioned themselves across the Iron Grace's projected path, with 90 kilometers between each ship. A net that covered more space than the Iron Grace could dodge through in any realistic time frame. Fleet Admiral Soth commanded from the dreadnought Keth Sovereign. He was an experienced officer, 40 years of service, a dozen fleet actions, a strategic record that included the suppression of 2 separate border world uprisings that had gotten out of hand. He had read the initial reports on the Iron Grace with professional interest and had arrived at what he considered a reasonable assessment. The ship was big, bigger than expected. Modified beyond its original specifications in ways that were concerning on paper. But it was one ship, one old, heavily modified ship, with a crew that had spent 22 years from their own perspective in isolation, using salvaged equipment that had never been tested in actual combat, against 200 warships with standardized equipment, coordinated fire control, and doctrine refined across 4 centuries of fleet action. He had run the numbers. He liked the numbers. He opened a channel to the Iron Grace. Vessel identifying as ISV Iron Grace, he said. You are in Keth hegemony-controlled space. You have committed multiple acts of interference with Keth Authority operations. You are ordered to reduce speed to 0, submit to boarding inspection, and await further instruction. Non-compliance will be met with force. You have 5 minutes to comply. The response came back immediately. Admiral Soth, said the voice on the other end. Female. Young, completely calm. This is Commander Vasquez of the Iron Grace. I appreciate the professional tone. I want to use it too, because I'm going to say something important, and I want you to know it's not a threat, it's information. You have 200 ships. I have 1. By those numbers, you think you win this. I understand why you think that. But the numbers you're using are wrong, and I'm giving you this information because boarding this ship is not possible. And fighting this ship is going to cost you more than High Command has told you this situation is worth. So here is my actual offer. Let us pass. We are going to Earth. We will cause no further incidents. We are not interested in the hegemony, its territories, or anything it owns except for the one planet we came from. Let us pass. Soth listened to this. He played it back once. Then he gave the order to open fire. 200 ships fired. The first volley was everything, energy beams and kinetic strikes and missile clusters, layered in the way Keth doctrine specified for a high-priority single-target engagement. The idea was saturation. Cover every angle. Leave nothing to chance. Hit the target with enough simultaneous force that no shield system ever designed could absorb all of it at once. The Iron Grace flew into it. The outer armor took the energy strikes, absorbed them. The null iron plating heated at the surface, glowed, dimmed. The energy dispersal layer did what it was designed to do. Spread the impact laterally across the hull surface, instead of letting it punch through. The kinetic strikes hit harder. 3 got through the outer layer cleanly enough to scar the second layer of plating. The missile clusters were mostly tracked and detonated early by the point defense system's small, fast-cycling weapons that Lena's crew ran in automatic mode because humans were too slow for point defense work, and they knew it. The Iron Grace came out the other side of the first volley, with her hull hot and some surface plating cracked, and moving at full speed. Soth ordered the second volley. The Iron Grace's spine weapon fired first. Lena had not named it. Her chief weapons officer had called it the spine line, because it ran the full length of the ship and it was the most direct possible description. The technical specifications were complicated. The effect was not. It generated a focused beam of energy, using the reverse-engineered technology from the deepest debris field in the fold, in a wavelength that was not on any Keth threat table, because it had not existed in the known galaxy until now. The beam hit the Keth Sovereign, amidships. The dreadnought did not explode. It was too large for that. What it did was more informative. The beam cut through the forward third of the ship, and the forward third stopped moving with the rear 2/3, like something had drawn a line on it. The rest of the dreadnought continued on momentum, turning slowly, its drive section still pushing against a command section that was no longer attached. Soth survived. His bridge was in the rear 2/3, but his command ship was finished. On every other Keth ship in the formation, someone noticed what had just happened to the Keth Sovereign. The second volley was smaller than the first. The arrows went out, 42 of them, spilling from the docking bays along the Iron Grace's flanks, scattering into the formation with a coordination that was not quite like anything the Keth had seen. Keth fighter tactics involved formation flying, tight geometric patterns, centralized command. The Aero pilots flew like they had grown up in corridors because they had instinctively aware of where the others were, cutting through gaps in the formation, never staying in one place long enough to be reliably targeted. Each one was carrying 4 rail cannons loaded with null iron rounds, and the attitude of someone who had spent their entire life being told they were going to do something impossible. They targeted engines. That was the instruction Lena had given, and the pilots followed it with precision. Not the ships, the engines. Disable, don't destroy, wherever possible. A disabled Keth ship was a message. A destroyed one was just wreckage. The spine line fired 3 more times. After the second shot, 30 Keth ships broke formation and moved to engage the arrows. Which was the wrong response. The arrows were not the problem, and moving 30 ships toward them meant moving 30 ships away from the Iron Grace, which meant 30 fewer weapons bearing on the ship that was actually hurting the fleet. After the third shot, 2 more Keth ships lost engine function to arrow railgun strikes. After the fourth shot, the Keth formation broke. Not a retreat, not at first. A break. Ships moving out of their assigned positions, commanders making independent decisions. The beautiful clean net of Soth's formation dissolving into something more like a crowd. And a crowd was not a fleet. A crowd could not coordinate fire. A crowd could not maintain effective saturation coverage. The Iron Grace moved through the crowd. She was not fast, nothing that large was fast. But she was steady, and she was angled toward a gap in the dissolving formation, and the spine line fired again, and then again. And the gap became wider. 40 minutes after the engagement began, Soth, running the battle from a secondary command station in his damaged ship, issued the signal that no fleet commander ever wanted to issue. Disengage. Lena stood at her viewport and watched the Keth ships pull back. Behind her, the bridge was quiet. Not the quiet of people not talking, the quiet of people who had just done something enormous, and were still in the process of understanding it. Hale was running damage reports with careful efficiency. The engineering team was already on the hull plating that had cracked. The Aero pilots were coming back in, one by one, the docking bay crew guiding each one home. 11 arrows had taken damage. None had been destroyed. The Keth fleet had lost 3 ships outright, had 14 disabled, and had 41 with varying degrees of damage. Against 200 warships. Commander, Hale said, one Keth vessel is not retreating. It's holding position at range. Lena looked. A mid-size cruiser, not a warship, a light cruiser, one of the class the Keth used for courier and observation work. It was sitting still, not targeting, not approaching, just sitting there, watching. She opened a channel to it. Keth observation vessel, she said. I see you. I'm not going to fire on you. I want you to watch what happens next, and I want you to transmit everything back to High Command. Every detail. I want them to know what this ship is, what it can do, and what we are going to do when we reach Earth. Can you do that for me? There was a long pause. Yes, a voice came back. Young, slightly shaky. But, yes. Good. Lena closed the channel. She turned back to her crew. Damage assessment in 1 hour. Rest where you can. We resume best speed in 90 minutes. She paused. Good work. All of you. Your families would be proud. She walked to her private station at the back of the bridge and sat down. She pulled out the written roster actual paper, which she used for everything important because screens could crash and paper did not, and she checked the aero pilots' names one by one. All present. She let out a breath. Set the roster down. 13 days, she said, to no one in particular. 13 days to Earth. The news moved faster than the Iron Grace did. The Keth tried to contain it. They shut down the commercial signal relays in the sectors the ship had passed through, flagged the Hera Point incident as a classified enforcement matter, issued instructions to every protected world station in the region to hold all outgoing traffic for review. They were efficient about it. They had long experience with information that needed to not spread, but 47 people had been returned to Hera Point Station, and every one of them had seen the Iron Grace, and the station crew had seen it. And both Keth enforcement ships that had been docked there were reporting to their commanders, and those commanders were talking to other commanders, and someone in one of those chains had a contact on a non-Keth ship who owed them a favor. Information wants to move. People want to tell each other things. These are facts of the galaxy that no amount of efficient signal management has ever successfully changed. It took 6 days for the word to reach Earth. Earth, in the 215th year of Keth protection, was a different place from the Earth that had launched the Iron Grace. Physically, the planet was the same blue and green and scarred by centuries of human activity, in all the ways that planets got scarred. The cities were still there. The people were still there. They had their governments, their music, their arguments, their food, their complicated relationships with each other. The Keth did not interfere with any of that. They were not interested in controlling the details of human life, only in its useful outputs, labor, minerals, agricultural product, transit fees. But something had gone quiet. The shipyards that had once built vessels like the Iron Grace were now certified for commercial construction only. The military training academies had been reduced to small internal security programs. The big radio dishes that had once reached out into the dark were now focused inward on Earth's own communication needs, because reaching out into the dark and asking who was there had been classified as a strategic concern under the protection agreement. The humans of Earth had become very good at not making large gestures. They kept their heads down. They paid the tribute on time. They sent the labor quotas when requested. They maintained and maintained and maintained that great human talent for endurance that looks from the outside like passivity but is, from the inside, something much more like coiled wire. When the word reached Earth not through official channels, because the official channels were locked, something happened in every city simultaneously that had no name in any political science textbook. People did not march. They did not riot. They stood in streets and they looked up at the sky. That was all. They just stood there and looked up. The Keth orbital garrison above Earth consisted of 8 ships. That was the standard complement for a protected world, enough force to maintain compliance, not enough to look like an occupation, if anyone was paying attention to appearances. 4 patrol cruisers, 2 heavy destroyers, 1 administrative vessel, 1 communications relay ship. Commander Taz of the garrison flagship Hegemony's Grace. The name was not ironic. The Keth simply liked naming things. Grace received the 3rd Fleet engagement report. At the same time, he received the first rumor from his intelligence officers that the news had reached Earth. He read both reports at the same desk, in the same hour. He understood the problem immediately. If the Iron Grace reached Earth orbit before he stopped it, It would not matter what he did afterward. The signal, the symbol, the image of that ship in orbit, above the human homeworld, that would be enough. That would be a thing that could not be undated, could not be contained, could not be managed from above. He sent a request to High Command for reinforcement. High Command told him the nearest available fleet was 9 days out. He had 7. He made his decision. The garrison's 8 ships accelerated out of their standard patrol orbits and moved to intercept on day 7 of the Iron Grace's final approach. They had coordinated their positioning carefully, a layered defense line across the approach vector, each ship covering the other's angles. It was very good positioning. Tas was a competent officer, and he had done the best work he could with what he had. Lena saw the formation on long-range scan and called her senior officers to the bridge. 8 ships, said her weapons officer. A woman named Shen who had the reputation of remaining calm at moments when calm was the hardest thing to maintain. 4 cruisers, 2 destroyers, 1 admin, 1 relay. The relay has no weapons worth discussing. The admin vessel has defensive armament only, so effectively 6 combat vessels. Against us, said Hale. Against us, Shen confirmed. Lena studied the formation. They're trying to force us to navigate around them or engage while Earth is still at distance, she said. If we go around, it takes time they're using to wait for reinforcement. If we engage, they're hoping the battle disrupts our approach enough to make a difference. So what do we do? Asked her chief engineer, a large, quiet man named Torres who had never once in his career offered an opinion that had not been immediately useful. We fly straight, Lena said. Steady speed, no evasion. We open a broad-spectrum broadcast on all Earth frequencies before we reach their engagement range. Everything audio, video, text. We tell Earth exactly who we are and exactly what we're doing. And then we deal with the 6 ships. She paused. I want the spine line offline, she said. Everyone at the table looked at her. These 6 ships are doing their job, she said. Their commander has fewer options than Soth had, and worse odds, and he knows both of those things. I'm not going to cut his ships in half if I don't have to. Standard weapons, arrows on standby. We push through clean if we can. Torres nodded slowly. Shen made a note. Hale had the expression of someone who was not sure if this was wisdom or sentiment but had decided it was not his place to ask. All right, Lena said. Let's go home. The broadcast went out 2 hours before the garrison engagement range. It was not a speech. Lena had thought about making a speech, had drafted 3 versions of one, in fact, in the quiet hours of the transit, and had deleted all 3, because they sounded like speeches. Too composed, too finished. The people of Earth did not need a finished thing. They needed a real one. So she sat in front of the bridge camera, and she told the truth. She told them who she was and where she had come from. She told them about the fold in space, and the 41 survivors, and the 22 years that had been 200 on the outside. She told them what they had found there and what they had built. And she told it plainly, without decoration, because the facts were extraordinary enough on their own. She told them they were coming home. She told them the garrison was going to try to stop that. She told them she was going to deal with the garrison. Then she said one more thing. 200 years ago, she said, this ship and her crew bought Earth time. The crew paid everything they had to give you more time to find a way through. I don't know if that's what happened. Maybe the Keth just got comfortable. Maybe the years went by and comfortable felt like peace. That's human. That's reasonable. She looked directly into the camera. But we are not comfortable anymore, and you don't have to be either. She ended the broadcast. On Earth, in a city that had once had different borders and a different name, a woman named Sol Reyes was watching the broadcast on a screen above a market stall when the Iron Grace came over the horizon of the camera feed. She saw it, just the shape of it. Enormous and dark and moving with the kind of steady, purposeful weight that very large things move with when they have somewhere to be, and nothing is going to change that. She had grown up hearing the story of the Iron Grace from her grandfather, who had heard it from his mother, who had been a naval history student before the universities stopped teaching naval history. She had thought of it the way you think of old stories, true in spirit. Probably not in every detail. The kind of thing that gets bigger and more perfect as it passes through enough years. The ship on the camera feed was bigger than the story. She was not the only one watching. The market around her had gone quiet, which markets never did. She could hear people on the street, not talking, listening, looking up. Above them, 8 Keth warships formed their line. Above those, the Iron Grace came on. TOS ordered fire at 7,000 kilometers. The garrison hit the Iron Grace with everything they had. The ship absorbed it the way mountains absorb rain. The outer hull heated. The second layer dispersed. The point defense system cycled through the missile clusters with mechanical indifference. The Iron Grace returned fire with her rail systems and her secondary energy weapons, targeting engines, and the first Keth cruiser's drive died at 5,000 kilometers. The second lost maneuvering control 30 seconds later. The 2 destroyers pulled back to flanking positions and tried a coordinated hit on the Iron Grace's drive section, which was the correct tactical instinct, but failed because the drive section was armored differently from the rest of the ship. Torres had prioritized it, on the reasoning that everything else on the ship could be repaired in transit, but a dead drive was the end of everything. The destroyer hits scorched the outer plating and achieved nothing else. The arrows came out, 12 of them, not 42, because Lena did not need 42 for this and she wanted her pilots home safe. The 12 moved with the same instinctive, wall-less coordination as before, and within 4 minutes, the remaining cruisers had lost their engines. The 2 destroyers, watching this, made a calculation. They dropped their weapon signatures. Not a full surrender. TOS had not given that order, and they were not going to give it without one but a clearly readable tactical gesture. Weapons powered down. Shields maintained. No more firing. Lena saw it on her board. Acknowledge their gesture, she said. Don't target them. Keep going. The Iron Grace slid past the garrison line. And then, below her, through the viewports, through the cameras, through every screen that was currently showing the broadcast on the planet below, there it was. Earth. Blue and white and enormous in the way that home is always enormous when you have been away for a long time. Lena stood at the main viewport and looked at it. Behind her, the bridge was not quiet this time. Someone was crying. Someone else was laughing in the way that sounds like the same thing. Hale had his hand over his mouth and was staring out the viewport with an expression that had no simple name. Lena kept her own expression still. She was the commander. She held the still. But she allowed herself, in the privacy of her own chest, something that felt like a tide coming in after a very long absence. She opened the ship-wide channel. "We are in Earth orbit," she said. "We are home." The ship answered her back in a sound that rose from every corridor and every compartment and every bay. The sound of 4,000 people who had been born on this ship, who had worked their whole lives for this moment, who had never seen this planet and were seeing it now for the first time. It was not a cheer. It was bigger than a cheer. She let it go on for a while before she opened the channel again. "Now," she said, when it quieted, "let's get to work." High Command's reinforcement fleet was 9 days out. They had 9 days to prepare. Earth had 9 days. 9 days between the Iron Grace entering orbit and the first long-range scan showing the Keth reinforcement fleet, 3,000 warships, the full weight of the hegemony's main offensive force, the kind of fleet they had not assembled since the original contact war dropping out of FTL, at the edge of the Sol system. In the galaxy's long history of military mobilizations, 9 days was nothing. It was barely enough time to organize a supply chain, let alone change the fundamental nature of a conflict. Every strategist who would have looked at the numbers would have said the same thing. Earth had no realistic path to surviving this. The strategists would have been working from bad data. The Iron Grace touched Earth orbit, and within 2 hours, the first shuttle came up. Lena had expected government officials, diplomats, people with credentials and schedules and the particular kind of controlled anxiety that came with high-stakes meetings. What she got was Admiral Senna Park, 81 years old, the head of Earth's nominal internal security fleet, which meant she commanded 12 small patrol vessels that were not technically warships because the protection agreement forbade warships and were technically patrol vessels, but had been built by people who understood exactly what might be needed someday. She came up alone. No staff. No security. She walked onto the Iron Grace's main deck and looked around the way a person looks around when they are in a place they spent their whole life imagining and need a moment to match the real thing to the version in their head. Then she looked at Lena. "You're younger than I expected," Park said. "You're older than I expected," Lena said. Park laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, the laugh of someone who does not do it often enough and means it completely when they do. "I've been running the numbers on what we have down there for 30 years, she said. waiting for a reason to use it. My whole career, waiting for a reason. Tell me, Lena said. Park told her. The protection agreement forbade warships. It said nothing about industrial equipment, mining vessels, heavy cargo ships, construction platforms, or long-range survey craft. It said nothing about the particular energy systems that powered a planet's industrial output. It said nothing about the specific metallurgical processes that were required for large-scale orbital construction. Park's predecessors, people who had understood, after the First Contact War, that accepting the terms did not mean forgetting what had happened, had spent 150 years building things that were not warships. They were not warships in the way that a loaded weapon, held behind your back, is not a weapon until you bring it around. The 12 patrol vessels were the smallest part of it. There were 43 heavy industrial ships currently sitting in Earth orbit, and the orbital stations, ships built for mining asteroid belts, for towing construction materials, for resupply work. Each one was armored beyond what any industrial vessel needed to be, because the people who built them had been very worried about the safety of their crews and had taken extensive precautions. Each one carried defensive weaponry that was technically within the protection agreement specifications and practically very far beyond its spirit. There were 3 orbital platforms that were classified as construction and maintenance facilities. They were, in fact, the most heavily armed space platforms Earth had ever built slowly, over 40 years, piece by piece, so that no single addition ever looked like a military expansion, and in 3 locations on Earth's surface, 2 in mountain ranges, 1 in an ocean trench. There were ground-based systems that Park described to Lena, in short, plain sentences, watching Lena's face while she described them to see when the understanding would land. It landed. How long? Lena asked. 24 hours to bring the ground systems fully online, Park said. The orbital assets are ready now. We've been waiting for this. 3,000 ships, Lena said. I know. Park looked at her steadily. We can't fight 3,000 ships, not alone, but we don't have to fight all 3,000. We just have to make the cost so high that High Command decides the cost is greater than the benefit. She paused. That's always been the mathematics of this, hasn't it? Make it expensive enough. Make them think. Lena thought about the Third Fleet. About Soth's broken dreadnought turning slowly in the dark. About the observation cruiser she had left behind, to report everything. Yes, she said. That's always been the mathematics. The 9 days were not wasted. The Iron Grace sat in low orbit above Earth and worked. Her engineering crews went out on the hull in the unpressurized dark and replaced the cracked plating. New null iron panels carried in the ship's cargo bays for exactly this purpose. More material than she had left the fold with because they had expected damage were cut and fitted and welded into place. The weapon systems were recalibrated. The arrows were fully serviced, every one of them, with the pilots running maintenance themselves alongside the bay crew the way they always had. Below them, Earth worked too. The heavy industrial ships repositioned. The orbital platforms powered up. On the ground, in the mountain ranges and the ocean trench, machines that had sat waiting for 30 years came online one system at a time and ran their tests. On the 3rd day, Park sent up 23 additional people, young engineers, most of them, who had grown up knowing what those machines were for and who had spent their careers maintaining them, in the hope that there would one day be a use for all that preparation. They toured the Iron Grace with expressions that Hale, who gave most of the tour, described later as looking like children in a museum of things they had only ever seen pictures of, except the pictures came to life and were extremely armed. On the 5th day, Lena made a broadcast to the Keth reinforcement fleet, which by then was visible on long-range scan, and knew she could see it. Grand Admiral of the Keth 3rd Expeditionary Force, she said, because she had done her research and she knew who commanded it. This is Commander Vasquez. I know what you're bringing. I want to tell you what you're coming into before you get here, because I am not interested in unnecessary casualties on either side. I dealt with Admiral Soth professionally. I would like to deal with you the same way. She listed what was waiting for them. Not every detail, she did not have every detail herself, but enough. The platforms, the ground systems, the Iron Grace herself, and what the spine line had done to the Keth Sovereign. The numbers, clearly stated, without drama. You have 3,000 ships, she said at the end. That's enough to win. If winning only means destroying enough of us that there's nothing left. But it is not enough to do that without losing ships. A lot of ships. And the question you need to ask, High Command, the question I am asking you to ask them right now is whether Earth, in the condition it will be in after that kind of battle, is worth what you will pay to take it back. We will give you nothing. We will not negotiate our freedom. We are not asking for protection, and we are not interested in terms. We are asking to be left alone. She looked into the camera. Think about what we built in 22 years, in a dead pocket of space, with nothing but wreckage and stubbornness. Think about what we will build in 200 more if you leave us alone. That is not a threat. That is an offer. She ended the transmission. The Keth fleet dropped out of FTL, at the edge of the Sol system, in one massive, coordinated emergence. 3,000 drive signatures blooming across the scan display, like a lit field. The largest fleet assembly Lena had seen numbers on in any of the Iron Grace's old military records. She stood at her viewport. She kept her hands still. All stations, she said. This is it. The fleet approached at a measured speed. Not a full combat burn, which would have looked one way but not slow, which would have looked another. A middle pace. The pace of something that has a great deal of force behind it and knows it. On Earth's surface, the ground systems finished their final initialization sequences. Park, monitoring from her command center in the mountain range in what had once been called Norway, sent a one-word message up to the Iron Grace. Ready. The Keth fleet reached engagement range and stopped. They held position for 11 minutes. 11 minutes of nothing, no transmissions, no weapon signatures, no movement forward. Just 3,000 ships sitting at the edge of effective weapons range, which was exactly what an enormous fleet looked like when it was waiting for someone to make a decision. Then the transmission came. It was audio only. A voice Lena recognized from her research, Grand Admiral Koss, the officer who commanded the expeditionary force, and who had, before this posting, served as High Command's chief strategic analyst for 30 years. Commander Vasquez, Koss said, I have read the reports from the Third Fleet engagement. I have read your offer. I have been in discussion with High Command for the last 4 days. He paused. The pause was long enough to be deliberate. I am authorized to offer a preliminary ceasefire to allow for the opening of formal negotiations. The terms of any final agreement have not been determined. High Command is willing to discuss the status of Earth and its associated territories. High Command is not, at this time, willing to discuss broader hegemony policy. Lena kept her face still. That is acceptable as a starting point, she said. There are conditions. There always are. Let me hear them. The Iron Grace remains in orbit. No further modifications to its armament or that of Earth's orbital assets during negotiation. No communication to other protected worlds that could be construed as organizing resistance. Lena thought about this. The first condition she had expected. The second, she had expected. The third was interesting. It meant High Command was worried about what the news of this was doing in other protected world systems. What it was doing to all the other species that had said yes to the terms all those years ago, and had been saying yes ever since. Accepted, she said. On condition that all labor seizures from Earth and human-populated stations cease immediately, during negotiation and after. A pause. Accepted. And the Keth fleet withdraws to outside the Sol system boundary. A longer pause. Agreed. She watched the fleet on the scan display. It began to move. Slowly. Back the way it had come. 3,000 ships. The full weight of Keth military force. Turning around and moving away from a planet they had controlled for 200 years. Because the mathematics had changed. Because the cost had become greater than the benefit. Because one ship had come back. The Iron Grace sat above Earth and watched the fleet go. On the bridge. No one said anything for a long time. Lena stood at her viewport and looked at the planet below her and the retreating fleet above and let the silence sit. It was a different kind of silence from the kind that had filled the bridge after the Third Fleet engagement. That silence had been full of the immediate adrenaline weight of something just finished. This silence was the kind that comes after something changes permanently. A big, quiet, slightly unreal feeling, like the moment after a storm when the rain stops and you're not sure yet what the world looks like. Is it over? Hale asked. He was not asking about the negotiations. He was asking something larger. No, Lena said. This is what it looks like when it starts. She turned from the viewport. There was work to do. Negotiations were not peace, they were the opening of a long argument, and long arguments required preparation and endurance, and the ability to hold your position while someone with more resources tried to wear you down. She needed Park and her team back on the ship for planning. She needed to know everything about the other protected worlds and what was happening in them. She needed to know what the Keth considered non-negotiable and what they considered merely expensive, because those were different categories, and the space between them was where the actual outcome would be found. 22 years of work had gotten them to this orbit. This orbit was not the end of anything, but it was the end of one thing. All stations, she said, opening the ship-wide channel. The Keth fleet is withdrawing. Negotiations are beginning. We are staying in Earth orbit for the foreseeable future. She paused. Shore leave is authorized by rotation, Earth surface. For those of you who have never stood on a planet before, I want everybody back within 24 hours of their rotation start. But go down. Feel the ground. It belongs to you. She closed the channel. Down below, on the planet, Sol Reyes was still standing in the street where she had been when the first broadcast came in. It had been 9 days. She had gone home. She had slept. She had come back. She did not know why exactly. It felt like the right place to be. She was watching the sky when the first shuttle came down. It was not dramatic. It was just a small craft, dropping through the clouds on a slow approach, landing in a cleared space that the city had organized in the previous 4 days, in a collective burst of practical activity. It touched down. The ramp opened. A young woman walked out. She was wearing a ship's uniform, dark gray, worn at the elbows, practical. She had dark hair tied back, and the particular expression of someone who is trying very hard to take in too many things at once, and is mostly succeeding. She walked down the ramp and her foot touched earth for the first time. She stood there. She looked up at the sky, then down at the ground. Then she crouched and put her hand flat against it. No one had told her to do that. No one had choreographed it. It was just what her body did. Sol Reyes watched this from across the cleared space, and she felt something she had not felt in how long. She genuinely could not remember the last time she had felt it. She felt proud, not of her country or her city or her own accomplishments, proud in the broad, simple way. Proud of her species, proud of the stubborn, unreasonable, expensive, magnificent thing that humans did when you pushed them far enough. They did not stop. They did not accept. They did not decide that enough was enough and adjust their expectations downward. They built a fortress out of a wreck in the dark. They came home. They were not done. Above the clouds, the Iron Grace waited in orbit, scarred and enormous and fully armed. 3 words painted white across her bow. We came back. She had. They all had. The galaxy was going to have to get used to it.